Lucky for us, he's also a former governor, two-term governor, good governor up in Maine. Let me reach back, Senator King, before we talk about other things, to your experience as a governor. What do you think Governor Abbott's doing right now with a mad bomber running around Austin?
Well, it's a hell of a problem. I mean, it's an all hands on deck situation. They've got some obviously there's well, you never know whether this is one person or whether you're having copycats. But the governor, I'm sure, is working with the Texas Rangers, the state police, the local police, the FBI. I mean, this is pretty scary stuff. Now, you're on Senate Intel, Senator King. Have you been briefed on this yet? Not yet. We have a meeting this afternoon, as a matter of fact, and I suspect that it will come up. We'll get at least an up-to-date briefing on what we know at this point. But from press reports, I don't think there are any clear answers on this. Now, we will cover the story as it develops over the morning. Let's turn to some of the stuff I wanted to cover with you. First of all, do you anticipate any difficulty in having CIA Director Pompeo confirmed as Secretary of State? I think it's an open question, Hugh, because when he was going for CIA, the CIA Director and Secretary of State are entirely different jobs. And I remember talking to him offline when he was first nominated as CIA, and we started talking about policy, and he said, I'm not doing policy anymore. This is a technical job. This is information. I said, you're absolutely right. That's the right attitude. But now policy, it's all about policy, and it's about representing the country. And you've heard Rand Paul has already expressed some pretty serious reservations about his attitude toward Iran, his attitude toward some of the problems around the world. So I don't think it's a dunk by any means. And remember, if all the Democrats plus Rand Paul vote against him and John McCain's not there, he loses 50-49. So I think it's going to depend a lot on his answer to the questions. I'm undecided myself. I like him personally. I think he's an incredibly smart guy. But for example, I worry about he'll encourage the president to tear up the Iran deal, which I think is a huge geopolitical mistake. There's no upside to that decision, and that bothers me. So what I'd like to do, Hugh, is I go to hearings even when I'm not on the committee, and I'm planning to go to his confirmation hearing, sit out in the audience at the Foreign Relations Committee, and listen to his answers and make up my mind at that point. So you are open to voting for him, but you are not yet committed to doing so. That's correct. That's right. Exactly the way I would put it. And I want to see what his views and attitude is toward a number of issues. Now, there is also word that a unanimous consent agreement is being hammered out to get some of our national security nominees, including Richard Grenell, who's bound for Berlin, passed by Easter. Have you heard of this, Senator King? I haven't heard of that specifically, but I know that I'm of the view that we need to get these national security people in place. One of the most important places that's open, Hugh, is ambassador to South Korea. And we don't even have a nominee for that yet. So, we've got to move these guys. I would hope. I use guys, by the way, Hugh, in a non-gender specific way. People. You bet. Yeah. Would you be willing to go to Chuck Schumer and say we've got to get this done, specifically Grinnell, because they've got a new government and they're the most powerful non-nuclear nation in the world. We got to get people over there. Yeah, I don't have any hesitation in talking about those kinds of nominees and Berlin, but I got to tell you, South Korea is pretty important, too, right now. We need a nominee for South Korea, but we also need the Secretary of State. I'm not debating you. I will listen and see, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. Yeah. It's a conversation. Let me talk to you now about the special counsel investigation. And I'm going to ask this of Lindsey Graham next hour. If Mr. Mueller was fired, would you consider that to be an impeachable offense? No. I would consider it a crisis. I would want to think about it in terms of all the other material that we've seen. High crimes and misdemeanors is the standard for impeachment, and I have a high standard for impeachment. I don't think impeachment should be used to change the government you don't like. I think that going back to Andrew Johnson in 1867, this is something we got to be really careful with. We don't want to change our form of government, but The problem is if the president does this, I think it is a huge mistake. It adds weight to the argument that there's been an ongoing obstruction of justice of trying to basically quash an investigation. I think I wouldn't say it rises to the level of an impeachable offense, but I certainly think it's going to create a real problem. And I think I went down the list yesterday. There are 8 or 9 senators, including people like Orrin Hatch and Chuck Grassley and John Cornyn, who have said this would be a huge mistake. Newt Gingrich said it would be a disaster. Lindsey said he thought it would be the beginning of the end of his presidency. So I think everybody's concerned about this, and I think it would be a huge mistake from his point of view. If he's innocent, which he keeps saying that he is, he ought to want this thing to go forward and be as thorough as possible so the American people can get the results, have confidence and say, yeah, look, this Mueller guy did a tough job and a thorough job, and there's no evidence. That's the result the president should want. If he cuts it off, half the country's going to think, hey, he's trying to hide something.
I agree with you. I think it would be a disaster to fire the special counsel, and I believe the reason he hired the people that he did is because they're professionals, and at the end of the day, no one, even the most extreme critic of Donald Trump, will be able to argue with their conclusion that no collusion occurred if that is, in fact, their conclusion. And therefore, right, he ought to leave him alone and just hurry it up. But let me turn to the other half of this. I agree completely with your comments on Face the Nation concerning Mr. McCabe. I'm going to wait to read the Inspector General's report till I weigh in on whether or not he ought to have been fired. That was made by career professionals to the Attorney General with a very short timeline. I don't envy him the position that he is in and having to make that, and I'll wait to read that. But I am concerned about the FISA process, Senator King. I used to do those warrants for 2 Attorney General. I would review them, the last guy to review them before they went to their desk. They're very, very complete. The FISA warrant on Carter Page appears to me to be deeply problematic. Do you share my concern?
Well, I haven't seen the whole finding. I mean, the whole the background. So I really can't comment on that. I again, you got a series of FISA judges. Carter Page, I think the warrant was renewed 3 or 4 times, and I'm pretty sure there was a different judge every time.
You're correct.
And they had to show, as you know, after the initial warrant, they then had to show that usable intelligence was being achieved in order to renew it. So that, to me, substantiates the fact that the original warrant had some substance to it, and then it was renewed 3 times based upon intelligence that was coming from the warrant. So I wouldn't call it tainted or any. I think that's going a little far. I think it was I think I think you're underestimating the judge. If he thinks it's politically tainted, we know from that the FBI did reveal that the material from Christopher Steele came from a political opposition operation. It was pretty clear about that. So I don't agree with you. I think there was enough there. And remember, it's probable cause. It's not guilt. And that's the standard is you have to show probable cause, and I believe that's what they showed. Yeah,
they need to show credible evidence of probable cause, and I do not believe that was there in the initial warrant. Now, if they produced it subsequent to that, that doesn't change the flaw in the first warrant, but we will see. Are you open to finding that process was abused, Senator King?
Sure. Well, I've been concerned. John Cornyn and I authored an amendment to the Intelligence Authorization Act on the FISA renewal that just went through a few months ago because of our concern about the process and being sure that it wasn't being used improperly under 702 and also FISA. I mean, it's a very powerful tool of the government, and I think anybody wants to be sure that somebody's guarding the guardians. That's the whole heart of our whole system, Hugh, as you know. But I think, again, you don't have to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt in a situation like this. The intent is to find evidence, and you and I can argue about it, but the ultimate decision was made by by a judge whose job it is to make these kind of calls.
Yeah, it does seem to me it's going to be fascinating for your committee to go through and actually investigate those FISA warrants, because I have always had 100% confidence, because I used to see the FBI's work product, because there wasn't a Division of National Security in the days that I was at Justice in the 80s, and they always had great work product, and it was never in doubt. We never had one warrant kicked back, not one.
Was that the 1880s?
Yes. I look, you and George are the same age. I'm younger than George.
They were tapping telegraph wires.
Yeah. Let me conclude by asking you about this omnibus and whether or not